So guys, here we are here, Gerora Inc., showing you what happens when you go too deep within the skin, specifically the hypodermis there, as Jonathan's doing the demonstration. You're starting to see how the pigment is being carried with the blood vessels. This is what we're trying to simulate with this little here, with this fake skin here. But as you can see how the pigment just migrates underneath the skin. What would happen in real world is those pigments will migrate with each other as it hits the hypodermis. Again, see the streaks underneath. And what this is simulating is how the blood vessels underneath here and the fatty tissue, subcutaneous fat, takes that pigment and just brings it all across. Think of it like a river underneath the stream. You can see what it's doing as the pigment is being inundated in the bottom here. So this is like a blowout migration. And again, we're zoomed in all the way so you can see. And now, again, you can see how the needle underneath just splits open the skin, depositing more pigment underneath.
And this is what not to do.
Exactly. Just a quick demonstration of what happens to the pigment is it settles underneath in the hypodermis of the skin if you're going in too deep. See that streak there? That's what the blood will do as it hits the fatty tissue, the subcutaneous fat located in the hypodermis. So I always like to tell the story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. You don't want to be, in this case, she was didn't want the meal to be too hot or too cold. You want to be just right. In this case here, you don't want to go too deep or too superficial, because if you go too superficial, hit the epidermis, and as your skin goes through its natural 28-day cycle, it will shed off the pigment as well as any dead cells. You want to be just right. So again, here's what happens when you go into the hypodermis, and you can see how the pigment is carried forward underneath the skin. And again, this is an example of what not to do.
Yeah, too deep.
And this happens a lot, believe it or not. As you can see what Jonathan's doing here is people will continue to do these deposits close to each other, making it worse, the migration.
You see how it migrating, see how it's puddling?
Yeah.
And that's why you get blowouts right there.
Right, and you can see different layers of how deep someone can take the pigments. You can see as Jonathan's going deeper in, the results are getting worse and worse.
See right there.
You've got to remember, on average, it's about 0.5 to 1.8 millimeters to hit the dermis. Depends on the person's skin, how thick it is. And this is what happens to the skin underneath.
As well as on top.
Yeah, look what's happening on top. And then again, underneath, as this pigment cures, it's going to be even a lot worse.
And this is how you want to be over here. Right there. Yep. So technically, this is how you want the pigments to look on the skin, and this is what you don't want. You can see a migration starts happening under the skin, which will cause the top layer to actually start bleeding out and migrating.
Like puddling with each other.
Yeah. That's beyond the lower dermis layer, which you don't want.